I went to the whatever winter expo, which apparently an expo means all the camera brands or reps from all the camera brands there. And I think my biggest takeaway was there was a lot of people at the Canon table.
That sounds right.
And they had like some cinema lenses, and someone was trying to explain why the Canon R5 with its new processor takes more pictures than the Canon R6, even though don't they have the same processor? I don't know. Anyway, he was talking to some dude about the Canon R5, or maybe it was the R6 Mark II, and I was like, this guy doesn't know. The guy's holding the camera doesn't seem like he knows anything about cameras. And then the Canon guy's talking to him like he doesn't know anything about cameras. I guess that's fine. Anyway, and then, so like, Canon booth, it just seemed real, just right up the middle. And then the Sony booth, the guys were like, what if you bought 2 A1s, huh? And I was like, I'm like walking by. Why? Like all of a sudden you're talking to me, trying to get me to buy your most expensive $6,500 camera. And he was very like camera bro-esque.
What is a camera bro?
I don't
tell me more.
Like imagine if he was wearing like khaki shorts and a polo, and he had like 3 models behind him, and he's like, you want to take pictures of these models? And I'm like, no, not really. He's like, you could do it with a Sony camera. And then like he turns around, like gets on one knee, and he's like taking pictures and like posing for me, taking pictures of these women that are behind him. And I'm like, this just doesn't seem like my kind of jam. I just don't want you to see you like stretching your khakis like that. And plus, these people that you're taking pictures of are really close to you. They're like 3 feet away. Are you shooting this on like a 24 millimeter lens? Those pictures are going to look nuts. Anyway, it just, I don't know. I felt like they were trying to recruit me into their Sony fraternity.
It's interesting to think about who those events are for, and like who is their target market in that? Like is somebody really going to walk up and just buy a Sony A1?
I don't know. Like maybe the people just want to know more information about it. And like these people are supposed to know everything. So like maybe it's a better way to get more information. I don't know. I'm standing there, I'm like looking at the stuff, and they had an FX3. I was like, I've never held one of these things. And so I'm picking up and I'm looking at it. It's like the first time I've had one of these things in my hand, which thicker than I thought it would be. Surprisingly.
I guess it does have a cooling fan and stuff. Maybe
it does have the fan and all of that. Like it's not huge. I think it is the body itself, like not counting the grip, is thicker than the XH2S.
Oh, okay.
And the EOS R. Maybe is about as thick as the S1H, the Panasonic S1H.
I mean, that's definitely bigger than I would have expected.
Yeah, so I'm like messing with it, and the guy behind the counter is like, "Oh yes, the FX3 just came out, pretty good camera. Seems like on the internet, like a lot of good video stuff.
Just came out.
Yeah, does good video features." I'm like, yeah, yep, sure. I mean, I don't know what to say to you. Like, yeah, it shoots video well. Doesn't have a shutter. It crops in like every mode. I'm like, what do you want from me?
You just don't know how to talk to camera reps.
Yep. I don't know. He's like, it has the same body as FX3, which was like right behind it. And I was like, yeah, look at all these cool buttons. Anyway.
So would you say you're bad at making camera small talk?
I don't think, maybe. I guess so. I just like, I feel like, and I mean, this is the half reason that we're doing this podcast, right? Is like, I just want to talk like really nerdy specs and that sort of thing. And whenever I'm talking to like camera reps at this sort of event, I want to, oh yeah, how about that, 400 megabit per second codec? Is the all intro pretty good on this camera? And they're just like, I don't know. I've never pulled the footage up on a computer and tried to grade it. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
we have nothing to talk about.
Yeah. I guess that's what I was getting at. I feel like events like this seem more like they appeal to like a more casual person, but it's almost more like they just don't appeal to people like us. Because I feel like we both know photographers that know very little about the gear, but they're really good at it, and they just care about the art behind it and stuff like that. And that's the type of person I feel would benefit from an event like this, where they're like, I haven't done all this research. I don't know everything about these cameras, but like I just want to like try them out.
Yeah, they'd be able to want to walk in and say, "Hey, I've had my current camera for 5 years. This is the kind of stuff that I take pictures of. is, do you have any of the new, like, what are the new cameras doing that I need to know about? And they're like, oh yeah, this one's actually a lot better for, taking pictures of sports because the autofocus is better. And like, oh wow, give me 2 of them.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, give me 2 of those A1s.
Yeah, exactly. I did talk to the person at the Fuji counter. I talked to the person at the Sigma counter. I was looking at that 16mm 1.4 Sigma lens.
And we talked a little bit about that before.
Yeah, and okay, so like we've talked about how I lost that lens and I'm looking to replace it. And the 16mm 1.4 Fuji lens, which is a 6-year-old lens.
Did you just say it's a 60-year-old lens?
No, it's a 6-year-old lens.
Okay.
7, maybe 6 or 7, right? I bought it for $650 at used, at this camera store. Whatever, I think it was a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago, somewhere around there. And now the used ones are $750 and $800, and it's like $900 new or $1,000 new, and I can't buy it used at that price.
That's a lot of money.
And then I'm talking to the guy about the Sigma the Sigma 16-1.4, and he's like, yeah, it's whatever, $350, $375, and they were doing no tax today. And I'm like, I can't. I want to buy like a first party lens. I don't want to buy like.
Why would you want to buy a first party lens? All your lenses are third party.
That was an accident. It didn't happen on purpose. And I don't know. Like the first party lenses are just the first party lenses. They're not really better.
You don't tell me, man. I have more first party lenses than you do.
Stop it. It's not fair. It happened to me by accident. Okay. Point is, I'm like, it's less than half the cost to buy the Sigma 16 brand new, which came out a few months ago, is just as sharp, just as rectilinear, versus buying the freaking Fuji used. And
the main downside is the close focus, right?
I don't know. Like, it's longer. It's physically longer. It doesn't have an aperture ring. It's a plastic construction versus a metal construction, which the Sigma lenses still feel
lighter weight,
good.
probably.
It's lighter. I don't know. And yeah, like the close focus distance is maybe 8 centimeters, which is okay. But the 16mm 1.4 is, it's like 3 or 4 centimeters.
Yeah.
And the reproduction ratio is better. It's like 1 to 4 versus whatever the Sigma is. Maybe it's the same. I don't know. I think it's like 4.5 or 5. It's like you can almost use it like a macro, get some close like flower pictures, but then also some wide landscapes and, pictures of dogs that are right next to you or whatever. I don't know. I was so impressed by the Fuji one that I want the Fuji one again. But it's so hard to justify whenever Sigmas like our lenses are just as sharp, if not sharper, and less than half the cost.
Yeah, $375 versus $800.
Yeah,
for a new lens versus a used lens, that is a hard sell.
Yeah, and then when I was talking to the Fuji lady, I had a chance to kind of play with the X-T5 a little bit, and that was cool.
Maybe we can talk about that when we talk about.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that camera. It's a pretty cool camera.
Yeah,
and that was, I don't know. We just kind of talked a little bit about lenses, a little about cameras, and
nice.
Nothing too major. She didn't have any like grand insights for me.
That's a shame.
I asked her if I should be thinking about the 18mm 1.4 linear weather resistant lens as a replacement to the 16mm, and she said no. When we replace lenses with the same focal length. Take, for instance, the 55 different 56mm lenses that we have, and then proceeded to list out like the 56 1.2, and then the other 56 1.2, then the 56 1.2 APD, and then the new 56 1.2.
Yeah.
I think I missed one.
Yeah, you probably did. Probably the 56 1.2.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Yep. So I guess I'm still waiting. If they came out with a brand new 16mm that had, maybe if they did that, it would probably take away the focus clutch, which I guess I could take or leave it. They would probably add the linear focusing motor, and it might have a snappier ring on it. And it probably would resolve to over 40 megapixels for the new sensor. And I feel like that would be a really great little lens. And I don't know. I guess more people are shooting with 30, 35 millimeter and 56 millimeters. So that's the ones that they're doing first. But
yeah,
I don't know. Well, they came out with the 18-1.4 first. And then they came out with the 33, and then they came out with the other ones. And so, like with this changed linear motor and higher resolving and better, refined Fuji lenses, if they came out with the 18 first, it's like maybe they're going to do the 16 way later. I don't know.
It may be on its way, but who knows how long you'll have to wait.
Yeah, like they didn't announce it. They announced like usually 6 months. Every time they're doing it, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to come out with a new version of this lens later. And they'll like pre-announce it by 6 months to a year, or like put it on their roadmap, 2 years out. And there's nothing like a new 16 on the roadmap right now.
Yeah, so it's probably going to be a while.
Oh boy. So the Expo was cool, I guess. I didn't buy anything.
That's surprising. Not even that white backpack. It's a very white backpack.
Like I think it's cool that you can like go to Peak Design and buy all like their 30-liter travel bag. Well, I guess it's not the 30-liter, but you can buy like their pouches and stuff all in that really clean looking white. But whoo boy, you take that out of the store and it's gonna look nasty.
I mean, your yellow bag looks kind of dirty sometimes.
How dare you?
You didn't deny it. And white just seems like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you put that in one airplane carry-on thing and it's going to be gross looking.
Yeah. I mean, like the texture on those Peak Design bags is almost indescribable. Like it's like feels like a waxy plasticky feeling, but like it's nylon, and I guess it's nylon that's coated with some sort of waterproof material. And so like that's the texture of these, white bags. And so they do repel some moisture, dirt, debris,
it feels
intrusion.
It feels like you could wipe it off with like a damp cloth.
Right. Yeah. But I think that, long term, as the bag creases and wears out, it's gonna get pretty gross.
Yeah. And with that coating, you'd want to be careful with how you cleaned it. Like I wouldn't want to use like a magic eraser on that. It might pull off the coating.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess I don't even know how you like recoat it, or if you can, or if the coating degrades over time. The bags do come with a lifetime warranty.
Yeah,
but I don't know if like that's probably just normal wear and tear if that's the case.
Yeah, I don't know. Too much for me.
I was real tempted on getting the tech pouch in that clean white color because I thought it looked really, really fancy. Like it would look super good on a wooden table, and like maybe you could take pictures of it. But at the end of the day, I think it's less practical.
I think it would look way too much like a purse.
I mean, maybe that's what I'm going for.
Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're back to talk more about the gear side of photo and video.
My first little pre-topic here, I mean, eventually I want to talk about the X-T5, right? Newly announced. It's coming. I held one today.
It's this podcast, and it's a Fuji camera.
Yep. So the Fuji Camera Gear Podcast, which is a different podcast. It's not this one. Probably. Maybe. Anyways. I want to talk about the X-T5. But first, this kind of rolls into it. Let's talk a little bit about thoughts on camera interface methods and buttons and that sort of thing.
So you mean like physical controls?
Yeah, physical controls. Okay. I'm kind of curious what you think, what you like, what you prefer to see on a camera, how you typically use your cameras, and like what kind of things you're looking for. So like things that I'm curious about are like dedicated record buttons. Some cameras you're just going to use the shutter button. On your XH2S, you program from the dedicated record button. You were programmed to something else, and you were just using the shutter button. So, like, thoughts on that? Thoughts on, on the rear, you have a four-way D-pad versus like a scrolling click wheel, or scrolling click wheel that is a D-pad. What do you think about that?
Well, I guess let's start with the record button aspect. So, I did reprogram it on the XH2S. I think I'll probably program it back to being the record button because I do think that's useful to have. And the reason I had done it originally was because I was feeling like I didn't have enough custom buttons and I wanted to do that. But
I mean, that camera has like 10 custom buttons.
It does, but it doesn't have as many as the GH5 had.
Isn't it different by like one?
Yeah. Anyway, but point being, I don't remember what I have that custom button set to. So maybe I should have set it back to the record button. I mean, I find myself not using that too often just because the shutter button's usually more ergonomic. Mm-hmm. I'm always in either photo or video mode, so it's not like I don't know what it's going to do when I press the button. But I will say that a lot of times the shutter button doesn't feel as substantial in the sense that if I'm not holding the camera and taking a picture or video, it's harder for me to tell if I've actually like started recording because of the two-stage, you half press it to focus and all that. And I've definitely had some times where I thought I started recording and I hadn't actually started recording because I probably didn't press the shutter button hard enough.
And then you get off cycle and like you're recording every other time versus every time.
Yes, I hate that. It happens to me a lot more with using like a monitor, because on monitors, for some reason, I'm not seeing the record icon, as clearly. And so
monitors need to be a little better, or maybe it's a matter of like cameras need to send that they're recording out to the monitor. Like on the Ninja, where it shows a red ring around the screen when you're recording. It'd be really cool if you could get that on the small HD or something.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a big problem. And for that reason, I think the record button seems nice. But on a lot of cameras, the record button's just not as easy to get to, like especially if you have a cage on or something. It's harder to reach.
Or it's like back near the eyepiece, versus instead of like right next to the shutter button, and like maybe that's better in some cases.
Yep. On the EOS R, it was a really, really small button. It was much smaller than the shutter button, so it's harder to hit.
Yeah, it is nice though. Like when you're recording, you just want to just start recording. You want to be able to do a quick cycle. You don't necessarily want to have to sink your finger into a shutter button. I've left the record button as the record button on my camera simply because I know that if I hit that button, it's going to start recording a video. And so if I'm shooting photos and I'm like, oh, I don't want to grab a quick video of this, I can just hit that button.
Yeah.
And like it's not going to be of the class or quality of like I'm at a 180 shutter angle and I've set my exposure and all this stuff. It'll be more automatic, but it's still like either you're going to get the shot or you're not going to get the shot. And so I left it because it's quickly and easily available to just start recording no matter what mode I'm in.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm coming around to that approach.
Yeah, so nice to have, I guess. But what about I know that you typically prefer the custom modes of like a PSAM dial and that sort of thing, and that's just a whole different method of interface. But on some cameras, even if you have PSAM, like you still get back wheel, front wheel, maybe aperture ring. What are you typically setting like your wheels and everything to?
Well, I definitely like having wheels, and it's frustrating to me when cameras don't have enough. The ones I like most have 3 wheels so that I can set my 3 major camera parameters to wheels, because I just find that simpler.
The ISO, shutter speed, and aperture.
Right. And I mean, I use the top 2 for aperture and shutter speed, which I think is how most cameras are set up. And a lot of times you don't really have a choice on which one's which. It's just whatever it is.
Or you can like alternate between the two, but it's like exposure and aperture or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you ever use one of the wheels for exposure?
No, I never do. I keep wanting to shoot in like an aperture priority mode or whatever, which in those cases, like aperture shutter priority, like I think having the exposure wheel makes a lot of sense. Sure. That's how you're deciding what you want to do.
Right.
But I just always shoot in manual, and I mean, I guess my exposure compensation at that point is whatever parameter I'm varying. So whether that's ISO or aperture.
Yeah, and you're watching your photometer or whatever, and just making sure that like you're in a reasonable range of where you want to be for that shot. Yeah.
So that's usually how I do it, because it's hard for me to decide what exposure I want. I mean, I ideally want it to be at 0, but that's just not possible sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were shooting outside in F-Log 2, is like everything's a little too bright, and I'm just going to have to be okay with it being a little bit too bright. And on the other hand, if I'm indoors, sometimes I would like for it to be bright, but it's just too dark. And I don't really want the camera going to 10,000 ISO just to get to 0. I'd rather just underexpose a little bit.
Yeah. Or sometimes, like if you're trying to go for a certain look with a photo, you may, click it up 2/3 to stop or something and overexpose a little bit. Or, people will do that on film a lot. They'll push their stops, up 2 or down 2 to improve their shadow contrast or whatever.
Yep.
The Fuji cameras have that. At least the ones with dials like the XT series, and they have that exposure compensation as a dedicated dial.
Oh, a lot of Sony cameras have that too. I think they have a dial for that.
And I never really thought too much about if I was shooting in any sort of mode on, like, because I shoot a lot with the XT3 where it has its the dedicated dials on it, and so there's not really like a shutter speed priority mode, but you can set your shutter speed to a number and then set everything else to auto or whatever. But I'd often like put the ISO in auto and then use the EV exposure compensation to kind of set it up or down. But I used it so rarely that more often than not, the exposure was left on something that wasn't 0. And it was like kind of pushing my shots too dark or whatever. But it seems like enough people use exposure compensation as a means to shoot in some sort of auto.
I mean, they must. It's still on cameras.
Well, like sometimes you run into an issue where you can't get off of it. It's like you can set your your front or back wheel to like aperture or shutter speed, and then the other one's always going to be exposure. And it's like, why do I have to use this? I don't want it. I don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, mostly I just get frustrated when I can't set every control to whatever I want.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't make sense to me that's limited.
I know we're dancing around it, but you should be able to set the ISO to one of the wheels on the X-H2S.
Yeah.
And it's stupid that you can't.
Yeah, that's super frustrating. And there's two reasons to me that's frustrating. One is that if you're using Fuji native lenses, they have an aperture ring.
Yeah.
So you don't that's your dial, and you could use one of the others for ISO. But the other reason it's frustrating is because the X-H2S doesn't have a wheel on the back. So, I mean, GH5, EOS R, a lot of A7 III, a lot of cameras have that wheel where the D-pad is.
Right.
And that can be your third parameter. You can set that to ISO.
Or fourth parameter for a lot of Canon stuff.
Sure. But a lot of the X-H2S doesn't have that.
Right.
And so you have basically no ability to put ISO on a dial.
It's so frustrating.
And the other thing that I care a lot about is I want it to be exactly the same whenever I use the camera. And so I have one OEM Fuji lens that has the aperture ring, and I don't use the aperture ring on it. I just leave it in auto because when I pick up the camera, I want it to work the same way every time. Like it confuses me if the aperture ring is set on something else because I don't
frustrating.
I don't expect it, and I try to use the dial and it doesn't work. And so I want it to be the same every time. And I want to have all three of those things on dials.
Yeah, I've been fighting that similar thing with the aperture ring because I went from all of my lenses being first party lenses through some very strange set of circumstances, and now none of my lenses are first party lenses, and I don't think any of them have an aperture ring.
Yeah, no third party lens does.
And it's, well, I mean, like some of the Viltrox ones do.
Okay.
But regardless, none of mine have aperture rings anymore, and it's just, that was the way that I was used to setting my aperture, and I've had to like change my life. And I'm using the X-T3 still, but now I have to use the front wheel for aperture, and it's terrible. But at least it's consistent, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
Back to that X-H2S thing real quick. There was I saw a suggestion online of setting the up and down D-pad to be ISO up and ISO, or set them both to ISO, so you could use up and down on the D-pad to change your ISO up and down. I'm already doing that for the autofocus, so
yeah, you can't have both, I guess.
Yeah, and setting two function buttons to one parameter just because it's not a wheel is kind of stupid.
I don't know. I mean, I've gotten used to it. It doesn't bother me that much to hit it on the top and then adjust it with the D-pad. It's a little annoying.
Yep.
I do keep hoping they'll release a firmware update that lets you set it to one of the dials.
You, me, and everybody else.
Yep. I also use the joystick a lot. So that's one of my most used things. Kind of disappointed with the one on the X-H2S.
Really?
The EOS R and the GH5 both had really good... I guess the EOS R didn't have a joystick, which was a problem, but the GH5 has a really good joystick. And I just got used to using that to get through menus, and I found it a lot faster than the D-pad. And the one on the X-H2S just isn't as good.
I guess I'm used to using the front and back wheels as pagination and item scrolling on a Fuji camera, and so I didn't use that joystick as much as you did, or you do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't have the same problem.
Well,
I think the joystick's totally fine.
Now I use it to set autofocus.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work that well. So one of the things you want to be able to do is press the center button. And on the X-H2S, I have a really hard time actually pressing it in. Like I always end up pushing it to a side or up and down.
Yeah, that can be a problem.
And even though that's the case, trying to do any direction, I feel like it doesn't have a whole lot of travel to it. And so it's just kind of not very easy to use. I don't know. The GH5 one is much better.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I guess I'm just used to Fuji joysticks, and so I don't really have any opinion on them. But
yeah,
it's good.
I feel like I care a lot about this stuff. Like the feel of the camera is very important to me, and it just always feels like it could be so much better than it is. Like I mean, how hard is it to pick a good type of button or a good dial or whatever, and like that stuff really matters.
I don't know. I've looked for custom buttons before, and it's very hard to find a good button.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you're designing a $2,500 camera, like take the time, figure it out.
Have you used the touchscreen as the autofocus joystick? Because even when it's off, you can still use it. Like if you're on the eyepiece, you can touch the screen and use it. And you can set the whole screen or half the screen or a quarter of the screen on the Fuji cameras to do that.
I have used it with the eyepiece. I haven't messed with it enough. I don't always like that setting because sometimes if I'm shooting low, if I'm not using the joystick, like as I'm walking around or something, I'll hit it to a different position and then autofocusing in like the bottom left corner without meaning to. And so sometimes that's annoying.
I'm predominantly a left eye shooter, which I know is probably a little unique. Who knows? But because of that, it's like I'm shooting across my face. And so I end up moving that thing with my nose all the time.
Yeah.
It's the first setting that I turn off on any Fuji camera is the stupid touchscreen control thing.
Yeah.
It's not stupid. Like, it's kind of cool, but I can't do it.
Yep.
I'm like moving autofocus points continuously.
I get it.
Yep. I end up setting the autofocus point all the way to the left every single time I flip the screen open. I'll like between flipping it open and flipping it closed, like between shots or moving between locations or something, and I will always touch the edge of the screen when I flip it open, and my autofocus point is as far left as it goes, and it's just I don't know how to. I guess I could turn off touch the screen to focus, but I don't know. Sometimes it's nice to be able to touch the screen to set the focus point.
Yeah.
Do you back button autofocus?
Yes. Yeah, I do that all the time. Because especially on video, I like to leave the camera in manual. So for photos, I use autofocus, but for video, I always like to have manual focus because I don't want it just switching randomly. But yeah, I use back button autofocus a lot to get me in the ballpark at least.
Do you ever use the back button exposure to like exposure lock, where you like maybe like you set the exposure off of something, you hold the button, and then you reframe?
No, because I shoot in manual.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So. Every time everything I do is exposure locked.
You're not a filthy casual like the rest of us shooting in aperture priority and shutter speed priority.
Yep.
I've never got the hang of shooting in program. Like I get it that it's changing your aperture and your shutter speed at the same time, but
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, stuff like that to me kind of defeats the purpose of why I'm using that camera. If I want to just pull something out and like quickly take a picture, I'm going to use my phone.
Sure.
And that's basically program mode or whatever, but if I'm using the camera, I have something specific in mind, and I'd rather just pick it myself. And I've just done that for so long that it's faster for me to do that than it is to use one of the auto modes and try and outsmart the camera and think like, I've done this, so like, what is it picking? Am I happy with these other settings? So I'd rather just do it myself.
What do you think about buttons on the front of a camera and switches on the front of a camera?
I generally think it's fine. I prefer them to be on the back, where I can see them.
Right. That's the controversy about it, right? Is like you don't want to like have to turn the camera around to see the things, which I always thought was a little weird that Fuji has that manual auto or manual continuous single switch on the front corner
that's
of their
a weird
cameras.
Weird spot to
but
put that.
it is the coolest thing because like when you're holding it, that's if your left hand's on the lens, I mean your index and your middle finger are really close to that switch, and it's a three-way switch, so it's like it's all the way to the right, all the way to the left, or in the middle. And because of it not having like a fourth position that you have to feel for, it's real easy to switch between single and manual and continuous, and you don't even have to look.
I mean, I'm fine with it, and they're usually in ergonomic positions, but I just forget about them when they're in the front.
I like the ones that are whenever you reach your hand around the grip, and then there's a button right on the body.
Yeah,
that's nice.
And on that note, having a switch for focus mode is really nice, and it's definitely something I miss on the X-H2S.
I strongly prefer the focus mode to be a switch versus a button. I hate having to press a button and then either like cycle the button or have to use a different interface key to flip between something. But like at the same time, if you want to have C1 set to autofocus and C2 set to manual, you can't really do that with a hard switch or else it'll be out of state.
Which is probably part of why it's done that way.
Right. It's the perpetual problem between software interface components and hardware switches. So, but speaking of hard switches and dials and all that, X-T5.
Now that was a professional segue there. You got to be proud of that one.
Yep.
All right. Well, I know you've wanted to talk about it, so tell me about the X-T5.
Oh man, this is my camera. Like this is,
but it's not. It's not.
I know it's not like my camera.
You don't have it,
and I'm never gonna buy one. But I think that it is exactly what it should be, and that Fuji totally delivered with this thing. For the longest time, I'm like exaggerating. Right? For the longest time, the XT series is a blah 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 blah. But like
the answer's like for like 2 years or something.
Yeah, well, like they had like XT1, XT2, great cameras. Everyone loves them. Everyone, with no exceptions. And after the X-T2, they were like, okay, we're going to start pushing video. And so they rolled out a bunch of new video features to the X-T2 and like really improved its functionality for video. And then they came out with the X-H1, which was the last camera on that X-Trans 3 sensor.
Yeah, it's like the last of that generation.
Yeah, like the last of that specific sensor and the last of that specific processor. And it was the XH1 was compromised in so many ways. Like if you wanted a headphone jack, you had to use the battery grip. There were certain things where if you didn't have the battery grip on, it limited certain modes because it didn't have enough power with that battery design, and the processor was too hungry, and it was compromised in so many ways. But like the XH1 was supposed to be this flagship camera, and the 6 months later they came out with the X-T3, and the X-T3 was better for video in every way
except for IBIS.
Except for it didn't have IBIS, but beyond, and it didn't have a flippy screen. But beyond those two things, which are I guess big video features, it had better codecs. It shot 10-bit. It shot 420 internal, 422 external, and all this stuff. And the X-T3 was such a better camera that the XH1 immediately became discounted. And there was a short period of time where you could buy an XH1 with, I think it was like the 8-16 or it was a certain lens, and it was like the cost of it total, you were basically getting the XH1 for like $200. And yeah, so they really cleared house on those cameras. I mean, you can buy them used for like $900 or $800 now. They didn't really drop that hard in price, but point is, X-T3, great. And so whenever they came out with the X-T4, it was like, this is now our flagship camera basically. And so they shoehorned all these video features into the X-T4. They added the video still mode button, and they made it bigger. They made it heavier. They added the flippy screen. And it was like, the X-T4 is a fantastic camera. I think it's really, really cool. And it's like right up my alley, but it was merging these two lines. And it was like the things that people loved about the X-T1 and X-T2, and like the photo features, and like not having to think about all the auto modes and being able to just like set their dials and quote unquote do photography. Like it was for those people. And so the X-T4 just had deviated so far from that now that they have like, here is our flagship video line with the XH2S and our flagship stills camera, the XH2, the XT line is free to be what it always has been, which is, it's not a rangefinder style, but it's a smaller travel size camera, street photography size camera with retro styling and the mode dials, and it's built for photography, not for videography. And it can just like be what it's always meant to be. And so like the X-T5 is really compelling in that regard.
It does seem like for a while they were trying to get the X-T4 to be everything.
Right.
And now that they have the XH2 and the XH2S that can be kind of that premium everything camera, the X-T5 is more free to be just like a photo enthusiast camera, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And so it still has the same 40 megapixel sensor as the XH2. Fantastic. Brand new sensor. It has IBIS, and they've improved their IBIS module to be smaller. And so the X-T5 itself is almost the size of an X-T1. I didn't realize how much bigger the X-T4 had gotten compared to those previous cameras. And I have an X-T3, and I really like the size, and it's nice. The X-T5 feels smaller.
Really?
Yeah, and it's really light, feels smaller than the X-T3. And it's a really nice camera. The grip is a little bigger. The way that you hold an XT camera versus like you have your range style cameras where the shutter button's on top, and whenever the shutter button's on top, your fingers aren't pointing back towards the camera. They're more pointing down, and so you're kind of holding the grip with the side of your fingers versus like the front whenever you have like a forward facing shutter button. And so you can't really like an XT camera with the shutter button on top is never going to have a super deep grip because it would kind of be contrary to like the contours of your hand.
Yeah, it wouldn't be very ergonomic.
And so what they did, they made the grip thicker, but it's kind of like thicker on the higher end. Whereas like if you imagine holding your finger, your pointer finger up on a shutter button, your other three fingers pointing down, there's more of a gap in front of your ring finger than like your pinky finger. And so They made that part a little thicker to give you something a little better to hold on to.
I see.
And it really contours well to your hand. So
Yeah.
I was pretty impressed with the new grip, and they made it so you can fit the new X-T4, XH2S, XH2 battery.
Oh, is it the same battery as the XH2S?
Yeah, it's the exact same battery. It's not those old 126Ss.
Yeah,
And so you get, your 500 plus shots, and it's turned sideways instead of,
Right.
long ways. And yeah, it's like bigger battery, smaller camera. It has the tilt screen instead of the flippy screen, and like it's just kind of been refined all the way around from the previous versions of it, all the previous 4 before it, into a pretty compelling photo camera.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you said tilt screen, not flip screen. That is
Right.
interesting.
Yeah,
But I think it's a good photo feature.
yeah. I think like if you're shooting pictures with it, it's gonna be better. And like it has as many of the features that you get from the XH2 as they could put in it, but they clearly were moving in a way that was, we're focusing on the photo side, and we're not going to shoehorn extra things into it. So for instance, it has 2 card slots, but they're both SD. It doesn't have CF Express. And you're shooting 40 megapixel stills, but if you're not, needing to record into ProRes or any like really intense video specs, then the only thing that you're potentially losing with going to SD or SD UHS2 type cards is shooting speed with burst. But I think it still does a pretty respectable burst. I mean, it's over 20 frames per second mechanical, electrical.
I think I prefer having the 2 SD cards on a photo focused camera. I mean, I had never used CF Express cards before the XH2S, and honestly, if Fuji hadn't done that deal to give a free, was it a 400 gig card?
320.
Yeah, 320 gig card with the XH2S, I probably still would not have used one. But now that I've used it, I like them a lot. It's really cool that every time I use my camera, I have that much storage space, and transferring clips to the computer is incredibly fast on the CF Express card.
Oh, yeah.
And then plus it enables features like ProRes recording. So I think they're great on a video camera, but on a photo camera, I'd rather have the SD card where I know I can read it in any computer. It's a cheaper card. Like, I still generally prefer SD.
I've come around on CF Express. It's whenever the Nikon came out, was like, one of the first cameras with CF Express as the only card. I thought it was a little annoying because it's like, why do you need this whole different card type? A lot of stuff supports SD. The cards are crazy expensive. I mean, they're still super expensive. But I double checked it. It's 15 frames per second mechanical for the X-T5. So, it's not crazy high. But like if you need speed, then you get the XH2S.
Yeah.
Like, that's what that's built for.
Yep.
So like you lose out on that with not having CF Express, and like you don't get the ProRes, you don't get the 8K, that sort of thing. But like that's not what this one's about. So I think that SD cards is the right compromise. A lot of people who are shooting photos just have tons of SD cards lying around.
Yeah.
And
well, and if you buy a current MacBook Pro, it has an SD card reader built in. A lot of laptops do. A lot of people have a card reader for their phone or whatever. So I mean, I still think SD is the standard, and it just makes more sense.
Yeah, I think that was totally the right call. Leave CF Express for the quote unquote pro level cameras, and let this one be what it is, which is more street photography focused, more travel focused, and not this speed demon camera or video camera.
Right. That was pretty interesting. I mean, I as somebody who more recently got into Fuji, I mean, I think it's a compelling camera. I've talked about wanting to get a second camera for travel or something, and it's hard to tell. Like, I don't know what the right call is there, because the idea of having something really, really compact is compelling, like having an XE4 or an X100V or, something that's super, super compact. Sony RX100, something like that. But on the other hand, if you want something that's photo focused, the second camera, I mean, this is seems like a really compelling camera. You get the 40 megapixel. I talked earlier about how I like shooting in manual, and the Fuji style controls where you have everything on a dial, like, fits with that pretty well. And if I had a spare $1,800, I mean, I'd consider it.
And the thing with Fuji, and like the reason that a lot of people still shoot Fuji, even Canon, Nikon, Sony shooters, like they're, oh yeah, I love, like they're into photography and they're, oh, I'm going to do my professional gig with my, Canon R3 or whatever. But at the end of the day, when they're just doing photos for themselves, most people still kind of prefer to shoot on Fuji, and it's because of something like the XT, where it's like you have your ISO and your shutter speed and your aperture just right there. You're not having to like dig into menus, you're not having to like look at the screen. You can just, interact with the camera, take your pictures. It's just, it's so much more tactile.
Mm-hmm.
And the JPEGs are so good that you can set your film simulations, you can make up your film recipes or whatever, and you can shoot in JPEG, not have to worry about having to go and edit all these pictures later. And you can just go out and take pictures and just enjoy the act of doing that and like going places and seeing things and whatever. And I mean, the X-T5 is just kind of really embodies, that use of a camera.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that tactile feeling, like it's photo focused with things like the tilt screen. And I totally get it. I can see who it's for.
Definitely. It is coming in at $1,800, so it's their high end of this style camera, which still feels about right. If you need a second camera, say like you have an XH2S or something, and you need like a B cam, it's nice that it can shoot 6K, 6.2K. It can shoot 4K. It has a lot of those modes. It doesn't have it has an HDMI port, and it can do out to a Ninja or whatever, and still support those 422 whatever codecs and stuff. It's a small HDMI port, not a full size, and so like it's compromised in all these ways of like if you needed a video camera, you'd be like, man, I wish it had this and I wish it had this compared to my other one. But if it's like I have my little photo camera and then I have like an XH2S, they would complement each other really well, because like you're going to use the X-T5 for your travel and a lot of your photography stuff. But if you need a B cam, it's going to match the colors, and it's going to be able to do all the things you need it to do in a pinch.
Yep. All of these cameras now are true hybrid cameras, where the XH2S takes great photos. You can do video on the X-T5, but both of those cameras feel like they have a certain slant to them.
Yeah, definitely.
And if I only shot photos, I probably wouldn't have gotten the XH2S.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for one, it's $700 more than this camera. Like there's no reason to. You'd get a higher resolution, and you'd get something that's arguably more enjoyable to take pictures on.
So what do you think? Would you ever get one?
An X-T5, I would consider upgrading from my X-T3 to an X-T5 down the line. I prefer this style of camera for taking pictures. I like how much smaller it is. Last time we traveled, I took my X-T3 instead of my XH2S. Because it's smaller, I could take the lens off and I could fit it in my Peak Design Tech pouch. And that was really cool to be able to do that and not have to bring a whole nother, camera cube and pack it into my bag. And so I really like the size, and it makes it easier to take it around and easier to just have it to take pictures. So having that style camera in my repertoire.
You spell that?
It starts with an R. Ends with a repertoire. It's important to me for what I like to shoot. So, as the X-T3 ages out, I would potentially be looking at something like an X-T5 to upgrade it to. But like you, I've thought about, what if I had an even smaller travel camera? I wish that there was more options for like a full frame fixed lens camera. I think that would fit really well into my life. Something that I can easily put into like a fanny pack. Oh boy.
I mean, I was even going to go farther and say that to me, the ideal travel camera would be something that I could fit in a pocket.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, like a travel camera, I would want it to be different enough from the other stuff that I have. Because like the X-T3, the X-T5, they're still relatively small cameras.
Yeah.
And like that's the appeal of APS-C. That's what why Fuji was like, if you're going to go mirrorless, like let's take biggest advantage of it and have smaller lenses. Like we were talking about earlier, the 16-1.4 Fuji lens is smaller than the 16-1.4 Sigma lens, because that's a priority for Fuji, is small, compact, light. You can have 3 lenses and a camera in what would normally take up an EOS R and a 24 to 70.
Yeah.
So like the X-T5 stuff is small, but for me, if I was looking for something that was even more travel focused, I would want it to be smaller.
Yeah, it's hard to decide what you want. On one hand, I think that a camera like this would be great for travel. It's a camera like the X-T5, because if you want to get really good shots, or if you're going somewhere where you want to take a telephoto lens or whatever, you're not going to get that in a fixed lens camera. You're not going to get something that takes good photos at 200 millimeters. And so having a interchangeable lens option like makes a lot of sense.
But if you want something that's like even more portable, fixed lens will be smaller because you don't have to have the mechanisms to support.
Yeah, and so it's like, what is your goal when you're traveling? Like, are you going on a trip where you want photo taking to be an active part of your trip, or is it more like, I'm going somewhere and I want to be able to get good memories while I'm there, but that's not my focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the latter, the ideal option to me is a Leica Q2.
Except for the price aspect.
Except that it's like $6,000.
Well, and that's part of what I think about with something like a travel camera, is that part of why I don't really take my X-H2S for travel stuff, because it's an expensive camera, and I think, do I really want to carry around a $3,000 or $3,500 kit with me everywhere I go? And I also use that camera for things that I take seriously, and like, if I break it, then I'm going to be in trouble because I won't be able to do my normal projects when I get back. And so those are the reasons I don't want to do that. And if I think about using like something like a travel camera, do I want to be walking around anywhere with a $6,000 camera in my pocket? I mean, I'm not at that point financially to where that would feel comfortable.
It'd be ridiculous.
Like, at that point, I take the X-H2S because it's the cheaper camera to replace.
Right. Yeah. Or, an X-T30, which I really looking forward to them upgrading the X-T30. I want to see that camera. An X-T, I guess it would be 40, which would be kind of weird because we're on 5 now for the other one.
Well, maybe they'd skip it. Maybe it'd be the X-T50, but either something like that or something like an XE4. They made an XE5, it's something in that size. I do wonder if they would, this possible future XT40, like, would they put the 40 megapixel sensor in there? Man, Fuji does that. They seem to use the same sensor in a lot of their cameras, but I could see them doing it. I could see it have the same processor as the XT5 and the same sensor, but it would have one SD card slot. Yeah. And maybe it would be trimmed down a little more on features. Maybe it wouldn't have IBIS, maybe be a little smaller. That would be pretty appealing, especially if it was like $1,000. Yeah. Or $800. Yeah. That would compete pretty strongly with Sony, I think. Yeah. It's like, then do you get an A6400 or do you get this 40 megapixel XT50? Well, I mean, like, Sony hasn't released any new, APS-C continuation, whatever, APS-C cameras for 3 years. Yeah. So it would pretty much dominate that side of the market, I would think, especially if it undercut the R10 and had more, or R7, I guess, because the R7 is the one with 30 megapixels. So if they could undercut the R7 with more megapixels and more features and more portability, that would be pretty appealing. It kind of remains to be seen whether that's possible, though, because right now the only two cameras they have with the 40 megapixel sensor are $1,800 and $2,000. So maybe it's just an expensive part right now. Yeah, but I mean, they put the 26.2 sensor in everything. Yeah, they put it in like 7 different cameras, and so maybe they get enough benefit from not having to manufacture multiple sensor types. Maybe that they can afford to do that. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great, because I'd love to have 40 megapixels for photos, but $1,800 is a lot of money, and it'd be hard to. So, like, one of the appeals of the full frame Leica Q2 is this is like a Sumix 35 millimeter fantastic lens, but it's like a 40 megapixel, 30 megapixel, whatever. It's a high megapixel camera. Maybe it's 50, but you can shoot it in a crop mode, where, like, obviously you could do it in post, but what you're shooting with that camera, you're wanting to get the picture there. You're going to crop in or whatever. And so you can use it like a 35 millimeter or a 50, I think. Yeah, because you can just crop in on the sensor. And it'll just crop in on the sensor. And so it would be pretty cool if Fuji eventually replaced the X100V with another fixed lens with this 40 megapixel sensor, because then maybe they could do the same thing. Yeah. And then you could have the small portable if it was 24 megapixels, 23, not megapixel. If it was 24 millimeter lens, and then you could then crop into 35 millimeter, and this is APS-C. Yeah. So that's like 35 and 50. That would be pretty appealing. Yeah, it would. It annoys me a little bit that I feel like I would like the Leica camera, but I don't have the money for that. Yeah, that's totally my jam. I think that the market for fixed lens cameras just isn't there, because there's nothing that really. So many people use their phone. Right. Everyone's going to use their phone, but like it feels like it's the kind of thing that I want, but there's no market for it. There's the X100V, there's the Leica Q2, and then there's the RX1R, Yeah.
But the RX1R is 5 years old. X100V is 3 or 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The Q2 is the newest one, but they're all like crazy expensive. I mean, the cheapest one is X100V at over $1,000.
I guess they're that expensive because they're probably a low volume seller.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
They don't produce as many of them. But
It's definitely something that I could see myself wanting and having, but at the same time, it's like I don't need an XH2S and an XT3 or an XT5 and an X100V. It would be absurd.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But it's hard because whenever you look at this stuff and whenever you care a lot about it, you can see where there's a niche for each different type of camera. And you can imagine like, this is the case where I'd want that one. I mean, it's like this in any hobby, right? Like there's always like, you know, with cars, it's like this car is slightly different than this other car. And so in this situation, it's better for that. And it's really hard to compromise.
That's why you can justify having a Jeep, a truck, and a sports car.
Yeah. Yeah.
And an SUV. And now you have like 5 cars.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's, for me, like having a small travel camera, I would want it to be full frame. Like I know that I shoot APS-C and I'm perfectly happy with crop sensor. Right now, I don't feel like I need the extra like ISO noise performance and light gathering of full frame.
But then why would you want that on a travel camera?
I would want it to be different. I would want it to be something that's not just another APS-C, not another Fuji, because I already have these 2 other Fujis, right?
Yeah.
But then like full frame travel camera, fixed lens cameras, just they don't exist. There's like 2 or 3 of them, and they're all really expensive.
It's just interesting that you say that because I feel like most people would want what you would imagine a full frame camera being bigger lenses and etc. And you'd imagine that being like your serious tool, and then having the little APS-C camera for travel.
Yeah, I know. I guess it is kind of backwards, but like, why not just use my phone? Like, it's got to be that much better than my phone.
Yeah.
And sure, my big camera or whatever, my XH2S takes significantly better pictures than my iPhone.
Honestly, for me with travel, the problem I run into is low light. My phone takes very good pictures in low light. Because it does all the
it takes good pictures in low light if nothing's moving and if you don't zoom in.
Well, sure, yeah, but I mean, you know, if I'm just taking casual pictures of doing stuff with friends, that's fine. Like I can accept those things, and it's basically impossible to do that with with like a serious camera.
Yeah, I guess I'm like the conflicting contrary opinion on that. I get that like the computational photography and the multiple exposures and the bracketing and all that stuff that happens automatically in a phone take really, really good low light pictures, but I would still prefer like a full frame sensor with like a 1.8 aperture lens shooting at like ISO whatever 12,800 and just have this grainy but more accurate, true to the moment picture that isn't, smudged out skin tones and a composited picture and blurry image over here or whatever.
Yep.
But like the picture that you can get is the picture that you want, and having a 1.8 full frame lens on a full frame camera is just like not going to happen in situations where you need a low light camera.
And even something like the Leica Q2, it's like it's great if that does what you want, but you're comparing a $6,000 camera against a phone that you already have.
Oh,
and
yeah, for sure.
It's like that is a hard sell.
And then like you have to have this other thing with you, and it's just a whole thing. So
yeah.
Yeah,
and I kind of come back to that. I think about the trips I go on where photography is not the focus. And what is the threshold where I'm actually going to take this with me? If I have to take a separate fanny pack style bag, am I really going to do that? Like, am I really going to have it with me or not? Does it need to fit in my pocket? And so
yeah. I don't know, a range style small camera that's like that, a wrist strap and a pancake lens is just, it takes so much better pictures than your phone.
Yeah.
And it's really portable. Like you can just kind of have it, you can throw it in your bag or whatever. And like, it's a nice to have, but you're right. I mean, I'm talking like an XE4 with a 2.8. That's going to cost you $1,600.
I don't know if it's that much, but like it's easily 1,400.
Yeah.
And it's even if by used, you're still over 1,000 for sure. And
right.
It's a lot of money.
Yep. And it's, I don't know, I keep talking about all the Fuji stuff, but that's their market, right? It's like these small, cameras that you can bring with you, and they're easy to travel.
It's not better anywhere else. Sony, if you want a good Sony camera, A6400, A6600, that kind of thing, like those are up there too. Same
and
price.
all the Canon options are huge. I mean, even if you're looking for their cheaper cameras, like you buy an R10, it's still as big as an XH2S.
Yeah, I mean, Canon has their like the M50 and stuff, but I would not buy those cameras. I mean, like the nice thing about Fuji and Sony is that it feels like they care as much about their APS-C line as they do their, like for Fuji, their APS-C line is their like flagship stuff. And for Sony, like at least the lenses are compatible, and it has always felt like they cared about that market. Whereas with Canon, with APS-C, it just feels like this like afterthought that's just designed
It's like a
to
price
capture.
point they're trying to hit.
Yeah, but it's just, it doesn't give me a good feeling.
One thing I've liked a lot about the Sony stuff is just how small they're able to get those full frame sensors into a camera. An A7 III body is about as big as an X-T3. The X-T5 now, being smaller and kind of moving back to those roots, it is going to be finally smaller than maybe like a Sony camera.
Yeah,
I think it's bigger than an A6400. Those are delightfully compact. But like the A7C, it's a full frame camera, but it's just so small.
Yeah.
And like that's a really nice thing to have, especially if you're trying to, moving around a lot and taking pictures and going places. But then you have to get full frame lenses, and that's where it all falls apart.
Yeah, both in price and size.
Yep. So I think the X-T5 is coming at a really great place in Fuji's market. $1,800 is a great price if you just need a photo camera and you're looking for, the best Fuji photo camera. I mean, you're looking at this, or you're looking at an XH2, and you basically are picking between PSAM or dials, and you have the option. And it finally feels like they have a complete line. Whereas before, the X-T4 was the one camera for everybody, and a lot of people complained on the photo side about like, get these video features out of here. And people complained on the video side that they didn't have all these custom modes. And well, now you have choices.
Yeah.
And it's like Fuji came rolling into this year, 10-year anniversary of X-Mount. And they really, really filled out a complete lineup.
I think that's one of the things that I am most impressed with when I look at their camera lineup, is that you get to pick exactly what you want, and it doesn't feel like you have to compromise.
Yeah, definitely.
It's nice to see.
One thing is you may have to compromise on the X-T5 is the color. So it does come in black, and it does come with the retro, where you can get the top and the bottom in silver with the black, leather, not leather, but rubbery leather around. Anyways, the X-T4 and I think the X-T3 came in 2 different shades of metal. You could get like a dark and a silver, and this one you can only get the silver. So
even still, having 2 color choices is more than most cameras.
True.
A lot of things is just the one.
I really like the retro styling. I feel like you have to get it with the silver on top, but I think they probably sell plenty of the black ones. And the one that I held today was black.
Yeah. I have a hard time picking. I do think the silver looks cool, but a lot of times with the camera, my focus is on it being unobtrusive. If I'm taking photos at an event, or if I'm traveling and I don't want to draw attention to my camera, then...
Is that why you put black gaff tape over the name on the front, so that it's just blacked all the way through?
Yeah, that's clearly the right move.
Yep.
But that's the one downside of the retro styling, I guess.
That's not as effective whenever you do it on a silver camera.
No, it's not.
I don't know who would do that.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Who would ever?
Yeah, I guess that's basically it. You got any thoughts or questions on the X-T5? Anything
Not really. Like I said, I'm interested in it. I think it'd be a cool camera to own, and I think it would fit in well with what I have. But, I don't, like we were saying with the travel camera thing, it might be a little bit too expensive for what I want, but I think it's really cool to see, and I think it's well priced for what it is, and I'm glad it exists.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe a few more thoughts on it, I guess. They didn't add any new film simulations. They didn't add any new film simulations for this year. Like, it seemed like whenever they came out with the X100V, they were like, here's 2 new, not 100V, geez. The X Pro 3, they're like, hey, here's classic neg and whatever. And then the X-T4 came out and like, here's another new film simulation. I probably have those 2 backwards. And they never backported those to the X-T3, which was really frustrating, because up through the X-T3, they were, all new features were coming to all old cameras, and they just stopped doing it because of resources for, development. But then, so I'm expecting, okay, they're coming out with, new cameras this year. Maybe we're going to get a new film simulation, and we didn't. Like, it's the stuff that's on the, the X-T4 is what's on the XH2S, on the XH2, and the X-T5. So I guess, the nice thing with X-T5 is you get all the same film simulations that they've been talking about. There was like 13 or 16 of them.
I mean, how many more films are there, right?
I don't know.
We've got to be hitting the limit on films.
Maybe I think Fuji should do like a collaboration with Kodak and come out with like an Eastman type stock. Cool. It would be pretty slick.
Yeah.
They could have it compete with a Turna or whatever.
That would be interesting.
I could see Kodak coming in and doing doing a camera or something. I'm surprised that they haven't kind of gone the Fuji route and like made, some sort of, hey, here's a fixed lens camera that shoots like Kodak film stock, but not actual film.
We should research that more at some point. I know they kind of missed the boat on digital, and it's one of the examples people use of companies that did not accurately predict what was going to happen and evolve to match it, and they it seems like they've just gotten left behind. It would be interesting if they either made a camera or if they partnered with Fuji.
There's still a lot of film stuff happening when in the cinemascape where filmmakers are coming back with, I want to shoot in film again. I want to get that dynamic range, that film look, that light roll off or whatever. And for the Euphoria, the second season of that TV show, they shot that all in film.
Wow.
And they the first season they didn't, but they really wanted to do it for the second season. And so Kodak came back and started redeveloping this film stock that's been out of development for 5 or 6 years. And so they came back with it because there was such a demand, from this show and from other shows to have that again. So they're having to, find the formulas and find the chemicals that haven't been used for a while to start making film stocks that people kind of remember out of just nostalgia. And so maybe film's just not going to go away. And like people are always going to be looking for that look.
I mean, clearly what these companies need to do is start doing microtransactions, and they can make it feel even more like a film camera because you get this film simulation, but you also have to buy like quote unquote rolls of film.
Oh my gosh.
And and you've got to do like a microtransaction on your camera when shoot another 100 pictures. I mean,
you're paying whatever, like half a cent per picture.
Yeah, it's coming, man. They'll put that camera on the blockchain, and that's going to be it.
That's it. Kodak's coming out. They're going to put the camera on the blockchain. It's going to be a whole new thing.
They're coming back, man.
Yep.
That's their stock is about to go through the roof. It's coming. You just wait. You just wait.
Whenever I was, that's not necessarily researching. I like all this stuff, but I was learning about some of the film stocks and, the thing with Euphoria and like them shooting it on film and that being interesting and whatever. And it wasn't Eastman that they used. It was, and it wasn't Porta. It was Vision 3 500T.
Never heard of that.
Yeah. So anyway, it was Ektachrome. That's what it was. Duh. How could I not remember Ektachrome? I'm such a monster. But what I didn't realize and what I found interesting, like I always think of film as, it has a huge dynamic range potential compared to digital. And like that switch from film in the 90s to digital in the thousands, everything got darker because the way that you can handle light roll off and high-end exposure and development is not as good or wasn't as good on those, first digital sensors. And so I'm like, oh yeah, the high end and dynamic range on film is there's always going to be, maybe not always going to be better because the new area like say blah, 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 blah. But what I learned is the Ektachrome that they use, it's just Ektachrome in general, but like that they use to shoot this TV show, but then also Ektachrome is like 4 stops of dynamic range.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that kind of blew my mind because I'm expecting film to be like 16 stops. And you can, or maybe like 14, and then you can push it an extra 2, one way or the other. Whenever
so
you
how
develop
do they shoot?
You just have to shoot in really controlled lighting, and you just have these like harsh shadows and harsh highlights, and everything's really compressed together as far as dynamic range, and like you just can't have really bright lights, and you can't have really dark shadows. But because you're constraining yourself to 4 stops at dynamic range, it makes everything very not flat, but like it's just kind of all within this like hard window. That's part of the reason of like why you get this certain look is because you've put yourselves into this certain constraint.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting. I didn't realize that Ektachrome was so constrained on the dynamic range.
That is interesting, and it's interesting that they would choose to shoot on that.
Yeah. Well, like you get that certain look. And the other thing that we're not even supposed to be talking about film right now, Daniel. We're supposed to be talking about the X-T5.
Here we are.
Oh, geez. Whenever they, like, usually you do like a color negative of the film, and then like you process it in a certain way to then, then you have a positive image. For this specific use, they did a color positive of it, and which causes like certain of like the golds and the greens and the colors to come out, and then they have to like grade those out of the image in order to like white balance it right. And because of that, you get these like really interesting, like warm tones. And I don't know, it's just kind of really cool.
Bunch of hipster film people, sounds like.
Sorry, I like all this stuff. And I can't ever remember half of it. And so I'm just saying buzzwords, and there's just so much chemistry involved in film. And I hate chemistry.
Well, I'm glad somebody's keeping Kodak in business.
Yeah, so it's cool to see that like Kodak's film stocks and, you know, movie budgets and all that stuff is keeping their film lines going. But it would be cool maybe if they pushed into the digital camera market. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it's a whole nother skill set and a whole separate thing. But
yeah, I mean, right now they probably don't have the engineering expertise to do that. It actually would make a lot of sense for them to partner with somebody like Fuji and license a film simulation to them or something like that.
Yeah, it would be cool to see that happen. A lot of old film stocks and looks and that sort of thing from Kodak are iconic. A lot of their portrait, whatever, you know, film stocks and Eastman and Ektachrome, like it's all really well regarded, and it would be cool to be able to have that in some other form beyond just the rolls of film. Because like I don't want to have to go out and buy, you know, a bunch of 16mm film.
Yeah, there's people
crazy expensive.
There's people that do that, but most people are not going to do that now.
Like if I was gonna shoot a movie or something, I would consider it.
Definitely not going to take that on vacation, and
no,
I'm not going to start taking all my product photos on film. Like it's ridiculous.
No. Yeah, well, film. I guess film does still have its place, basically.
Yeah.
And it would be cool to see Kodak kind of push more on that nostalgia, and maybe release, you know, products that are digital in fashion, but you kind of do what Fuji's doing.
Yeah.
Maybe there's not room for it. Fuji isn't like the lead of the market or anything.
No, certainly not.
It's still one of the big selling points. I mean, everyone else is shooting like standard profile, flat, whatever. And I think that the Fujifilm simulations are more than just like I'm shooting in monochrome, or I'm shooting in standard, or I'm shooting in vivid.
Yeah, I agree.
Like they're doing more to try to make certain colors pop and certain colors be favored. Like stuff like nostalgic neg is really good if you have a lot of oranges and reds, because it favors those, and you have more, you know, texture and range within those colors, and it's kind of isolating out your greens, and it's more of a look rather than just you know, this is color, this is bright color.
Yeah, it gives the camera a lot more character.
Yeah, it does. But then like if you're just trying to shoot something that's, you know, I just want to shoot this in normal, there isn't really a normal. You're trying to shoot in Provia, but it's, I don't know. I guess that's not who Fuji cameras are for.
Yeah, I suppose not.
Oh well, I think I've been enough tangenty today that maybe we should call it a wrap.
I think so too.
Cool.
That's going to do it for the show today. Thanks for joining us, and if you enjoyed it, we'd encourage you to rate us on iTunes and tell your photography friends about the show. Also, check out our website at cameragearpodcast.com to learn more or send us feedback and questions. We'll be back with more next week.